Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Mindy Eggen, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a background die cut inlay technique. These are really fun to do because you can almost always get two cards out of one. I'm going to start off by creating my background, and today I will be using the Distress inks, and I'm also going to be doing some ink blending, and this is for a really nice pastel rainbow, so this is a really great combination for spring. I'm starting off with a Kitsch Flamingo, and I'll be using just a blending tool to apply some ink. Now, when it comes to ink blending, you want to use a really super smooth cardstock. Today, I am using Gina K Designs Layering White cardstock. It is super smooth, definitely a great one for ink blending, but any super smooth cardstock that you have would work for this. So I'm just starting off by picking up some ink onto my blending tool, and then in a circular motion, starting off of the cardstock, I'm going to blend onto it. Now, a lot of times I will dab off my ink first. That way I'm not getting any harsh lines. It's a lot easier to add color than it is to try and blend away the harsh lines that the foam tool may leave. Now, I definitely would have used blending brushes for this, but I didn't have any blending brushes that were ready with the Distress inks. I have them all set off on the side for oxides, but any blending tool would work on this technique. So then I applied Squeezed Lemonade Distress ink. I added a strip of that color and then I blended it into that Kitsch Flamingo. And I do go back and forth between my colors just to help that transition a little bit. Next, I'm bringing in Cracked Pistachio, which is another great pastel color for spring. Once again, I start off on the cardstock. This time I'm starting off of the edge and I add that strip of Cracked Pistachio. And then my last color is Broken China, starting at the very bottom. So I always start off the cardstock and blend onto it with my circular motion. And then I'll go back and forth between the colors to smooth out the transition. The more color you add, the better it is going to blend. And then I want to make sure that I kind of give this time to dry. Now, as you can see, the more ink that I add to this cardstock, the brighter those colors are going to get, and it's really going to fill in any white areas or splotchy areas. Then I do like to kind of go back and forth. You're going to see that between the Kitsch Flamingo and that Squeezed Lemonade, you're going to get this really nice pastel orange, almost like a dried marigold without having the dried marigold there. So I plan on doing some heat embossing on this, and I want to make sure this is really nice and dry before I do any heat bossing. So I'm going to just help speed up that process with my heat tool, just waving it back and forth over the cardstock. And I'm going to test this out. This is just using some embossing powder. I'm going to sprinkle it on, and if it's not sticking, then I know it's ready to be heat embossed. To do my heat embossing, I'm going to use the new Spring Blooms stamp set. This is a large 6x6 background stamp, and not only is it good for coloring, but I love these stamp sets for doing any type of background technique. Now I want to make sure I'm prepping this so that it takes ink better, and I just run my hand over the top of it to kind of make that almost cloudy looking. And then I can prep my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to ink up this entire background with the VersaMark ink. So any type of sticky ink that you have, and I'm going to stamp that down onto my background, really applying pressure so that all of this image is stamped onto that background. Then I'll just carefully open the door and peel back my cardstock that's stuck to the stamp set. And I am going to sprinkle on sparkle embossing powder. Now this step you could definitely leave for the die cut inlay technique. You wouldn't have to heat emboss a background. I just thought that it added a little bit of sparkle and a little bit more interest to the background. So once I tap off all of my excess powder, I'm going to melt all of that with my heat tool. Next, I'm going to take this A2 Quatrefoil cover plate, and I'm going to put my background behind it. So I'm die cutting this from my blended cardstock, and I'm going to hold my cardstock down to that cover plate just using some low tack tape, and then run this through my die cut machine. Now after this die cuts, I'm bringing my plate over to the screen. Now I know my cutting plate looks horrible. It's very well loved, but most of my pieces stayed on the plate. So the easiest way to do this is I'm taking a piece of press and seal and I am just pushing down all over that background. Then I'm going to just trim off any excess that's overhanging and carefully peel this up from my die cut plate. This is going to keep everything in a perfect position and make it a lot easier to attach this to a card base. So just carefully pull that up, and the pieces are a decent size so that if any of them do pop out, it's very easy to place them back in there. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of dimension behind all of those die cut pieces. And the way I'm going to do it is just by taking some small foam squares. There are numerous ways that you could do this. You could die cut this multiple times. You could use just some craft foam, which I didn't have on hand at the time. So foam squares was just really easy. I have them on hand and it really didn't take me that long. So just adding one behind each of those pieces. Some of my pieces are a little skinnier. And in order for me to get a foam square on there, I'm leaving the foam square on its backing sheet, and I am just going to trim my foam squares in half. These are going to give me the perfect size to add to those pieces on the very edge. And then I do have a couple small corner pieces. So I will trim one of those half pieces into a smaller piece. So it's a lot easier to cut these foam squares when it's on its backing sheet than when it's off of there and you have all that stickiness to mess with. And then I just help with my tweezers and add those right to the background. Then with the help of my craft pick, I'm going to remove the backing on each of those foam squares. And I have a paper towel set off on the side there to catch all of those because they're kind of hard to get off of that glass media mat. So I just have a little paper towel to help catch that. And then to attach this to a card base, I have a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm adding that right on top of the foam square. So I'm kind of doing this upside down, but I found that to be a lot easier. And then I could just peel away this press and seal, all of my pieces held in place, and then I can peel back that frame. So we want to save that frame because we can use that for another card. But now here we have just this gorgeous ink blend. We have some interest back there with that background stamp and just some really nice dimension added with the foam squares. So here I'll give you a closer look of that background. You can't really tell what the background is, but I think it's just really neat to have that added interest and the sparkle back there. But you could certainly leave that background stamp off if you prefer. Now for my second card here that I'm using, that frame piece, I am just taking some of the liquid glue and I'm adding that all around the border and then kind of in between the intersecting lines of that border. And then I'm going to take another piece of white cardstock and I'm going to add that on top. So I love when we can get 2 from 1 technique. Now for a sentiment, I am just using the spring buzzword and I die cut that 2 times from white cardstock and I'm going to layer that together with the liquid glue. I also die cut it once from some gold foil cardstock and I'm going to add that on top. So I made 2 of them so that I can have one for each card, and then I set them off on the side with something heavy on top for a few minutes just to make sure that that sticks down really well. And I also have a shadow piece here die cut from vellum. Then I'm just taking the liquid glue again, adding a little bit of dots to the back of the word on that vellum, and then attaching that right to the front of the card. Now I decided I wanted to leave it just as is. I didn't want to add any other sentiments to the front. I really liked the blending in the background. So I am going to create card bases here, and I have 2 pieces of cardstock measuring 8 1/2 by 5 1/2, and I scored them at 4 1/4. And then I'm just going to reinforce those folds with my bone folder. And I am going to use a sentiment from the Spring Joy Bouquet stamp set. I don't usually stamp on the inside of my cards, but since I did want to leave the front just as is, I'm going to add this beautiful sentiment to the inside. So I folded my cardstock over to get to the inside of the card, and I used the misty corners to help push my sentiment down and line that up straight. Then I'm stamping this in the Obsidian ink from Gina K Designs. And once I have both of those stamped, I'm going to add these panels to the front of the cardstock. So just using a tape runner, adding to the front of that card base, and then I can attach my panel. And then here's a look at both of the cards that I created in today's video. And I had done one off screen. I just wanted to show you what it would look like if you didn't add the background stamp. So here is just that ink blended panel. Both ways work out really well. That finishes up my cards for today. I hope you enjoyed the die cut inlay technique. I want to thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you again real soon.